All right, very good. So with that, I'll jump into some opening remarks. So for those of you that have been on some of these in the past, similar format, but for those of you that haven't, I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. So first, good afternoon, and thank you for attending. The three of us are really eager to continue sharing ideas as we have over the past couple of months, and this one is specifically related to planning a safe return to the office. Just a quick note, we are providing ideas and resources, but not specific guidance or recommendations for you or your unique business situations. Adam, Jeremy, and I are more than happy to engage with you and your company individually as part of your advising team in our individual disciplines, HR, law, insurance, and risk management, and provide consulting and tailored recommendations to you and your leadership team. That being said, we're going to much generalized information to you today, and we can drill a little bit deeper into some broad kind of scenarios. We just can't get too specific in that sense. So, okay, let's get moving. So we have about an hour. This webinar is still pending approval for one SHRM and one HRCI credit. So with the expectation that those approvals will come through in the next several days to a week, those certificates will be emailed to the attendees once they come to me. Thanks, Tricia Kleber, for your additional support on this. She's been fantastic at really short windows of time and me asking for her help to get these things through the approval process. We are recording this, so both for those who miss it and for those who want to review it again, there'll be a link in the post-webinar post for you to be able to see that. Please use the Q&A feature for questions that you would like to have answered. Our agenda, I'll provide some brief bios, and then we'll each share kind of our respective insights into what's going on. Then we'll jump right into Q&A from you, close out around 3 p.m. If necessary, we do have some time for a short overtime session that we can address any unanswered questions. I will close everything out like right at 3 so that we can close that portion out, and then we can stay a little bit later to run through any unanswered questions that we can get to. So on to intros. So I'm Brian Klickener, and I'm with Risk Strategies. Risk Strategies has over 1,800 employees and 70 plus offices around the U.S. Actually, I guess technically speaking, we have a few more offices now. They don't include La Casa de Klickener and other home offices just yet, count, but 70 plus official offices. I've worked for over a decade as an insurance broker and consultant, in addition to about 5 years as an executive in a Virginia-based government contractor. Here at Risk Strategies, my team and I work with clients to create bespoke employee benefit programs. Our focus is to engage and enhance employee and employer experiences, as well as control and mitigate costs where possible inside of the health plan, whether it's creative alternative funding solutions, cost transparency, digital enrollment, app-enabled employee advocacy, or even kind of at the fringes of what people are doing now, which is direct contracts with physicians and hospitals, even to removing the big four insurance carriers from the equation. We're doing that now for our clients here at Risk Strategies. So Adam Calli, my friend Adam, is a 20-year plus HR vet and principal consultant and founder of ARC Human Capital LLC. His firm focuses on helping organizations reap the rewards of the promise of a modern HR while meeting compliance mandates, primarily focused on small to medium businesses. He enjoys seeing how well-run HR organizations can have a positive strategic impact on a company. When not consulting, he's an HR instructor at George Mason University's Executive and Professional Education Program, and is one of only 41 active instructors nationwide for the Society of Human Resources Management, or SHRM. Our friend Jeremy Schneider. Jeremy is a labor and employment attorney in Washington, D.C., in the Washington, D.C. Regional Office of Jackson Lewis, P.C. He represents employers in a wide array of employment, non-compete, and whistleblower litigation. Jeremy also provides advice and training to management to help employers avoid litigation. So I'll jump in with the benefits update and get things rolling on this. So in the past couple of weeks, let me just share this screen. In the past couple of weeks, and I don't have a formal presentation in the sense, but I am going to jump through some websites and some other slides. The IRS and the Employee Benefits Security Administration issued a final ruling regarding the extension of certain COBRA timeframes during the COVID-19 national emergency. So there's a couple of things that have been out, whether it's the Federal Register notice that's been out, And these links, if you're interested, I can provide them out in a post email follow-up, because there's a lot of links, and I won't go through anything specific, and I won't read through all of these pieces. But at a high level, individual COBRA providers, you need to check with your individual COBRA provider on the specific processes. But in short, they should be accepting, or you should be accepting if you're self-administering, although I hope that you're not. Late payments will be automatically accepted. Late elections will continue to be processed. Disability extensions will be honored beyond the required timeline, and HIPAA special enrollments will be allowed beyond the required timeline. So there's a couple of, like I said, links here to the Federal Register, and there's one from IRS rather, that you can kind of take a look through, post this, and then chat with your benefits consultant and with your provider. Hopefully you're using a third-party administrator of some sort to administer COBRA. It's much more efficient. Next is related to flexible spending accounts. So with respect to that, this just came through, I just learned of this recently. So there have been a number of items that have come up recently just as a result. I think we talked about dependent care on one or two of the FFCRA benefits, and that substantial changes in your dependent care needs can result in kind of an off-cycle election. But it's been made more formalized here recently by the IRS. So an extended claim period. So for the first, there's like 4 basic things: extended claim period, expanded mid-year elections, earlier relief for HDHPs, and an increased rollover amount. So the first one, extended claim period, this basically allows for a claim period may apply unused amounts remaining in a health FSA or dependent care FSA program for expenses incurred for those same qualified benefits through December 31st, 2020. I'll distribute a link on this. There's some examples. It gets kind of, we'll get way in the weeds if I try to walk through how this works, but it allows for you to apply monies later than normally you would be allowed to. Expanded mid-year elections. So the second change expands the ability of employees to make mid-year elections on the following: their health care, their health coverage, their health FSAs, and their dependent care programs. So basically, an employee can be given a special enrollment period to either add money into an FSA, enroll in an FSA, or decommit from putting money into an FSA. So this is a change to what was previously allowed. Both of those prior 2 things and the last one will need to have the employer will need to use its discretion and amend their current Section 125 plan to allow for these changes. So get with whoever it is that's providing that to you, whether it's your benefits consultant or you're getting that through some sort of an FSA vendor that's managing that. So you need to reach out to them in order to make those changes, and then roll that change out to your employees. So early relief for HDHPs. So the third change applies to early relief for high deductible plans that cover expenses related to COVID-19. There's a temporary exception for telehealth services retroactively back to January 2020. So before, this is an area where HDAPs have run into a problem when you have like people paying like a $25 or $45 copay for a some kind of a telehealth visit. It wasn't allowed. So this is an exemption for this. And then increased rollover. So the final and perhaps largest like long-term change, this new relief affecting FSAs, is an updated rollover provision. So since its introduction in 2013, the rollover feature has been set at $500 with no fluctuations. So in a historical move with this legislation or this ruling, the increase has gone. They've put an increase of $50 into the rollover amount, and they've also indexed this to inflation. So that's something that you'll see change moving forward inside of your plans. Carriers. So recently, Cigna communicated that it covers FDA-approved COVID-19 diagnostic antibody testing or serology tests when ordered by a physician for the diagnosis of COVID-19, and will waive the customer cost share through May 31st of 2020. So I have a link here, and I won't spend a ton of time kind of diving into the specifics on this. Let me see, where did that run off to? So each of your health insurance providers have their own kind of way that they're treating this. And I've shared this site before. So if you want to specifically know what your carrier is doing on this, you can just go to the AHIP website and you can just find where your particular carrier, whether it's Cigna or some other one, Blue Cross Blue Shield, any of those different, brands of Blue Cross. You can take a look at this and see how they're covering COVID-related services. This AHIP site will then drill down into the individual carrier's website so you can get kind of primary source information. So, like as we've discussed also on previous webinars, health carriers are covering testing and testing-related services in the broadest sense. Many have relaxed their eligibility requirements, allowing furloughed employees to stay on their health plan. So this is kind of old news. The thing is to think about what's going to happen in the future, right? So there have been a number of different reports related to the costs associated with this down the road. So if you're looking at today, yeah, these carriers are taking on this burden saying, yes, we'll cover, especially in the fully insured space where they don't really have any risk by covering these things because they'll just hit your rates in the next year. And that's what we're seeing. What we're seeing likely is going to occur. The numbers that I've seen are somewhere between 7 and 10% is a likely COVID premium increase that you'll see in 2021 as a result of this. And this is on top of the already projected trend increase of 5%. So if you're in that smaller, fully insured kind of pooled risk space, you should probably think that you're going to see about a 12% starting point for your renewal next year outside of just the general risk that's going to be put into that as well. So just for planning purposes, ancillary carriers as well. There's a lot of things that are going on with these ancillary providers. So a lot of them are giving rate passes or rate holds to clients that are renewing right now. And so we've been talking to our clients that it might be in their best interest to take a look, even if they are getting a rate pass, to potentially market it today. There's a lot of evidence to support the fact that it is probable that we will see an increase in costs in the next year as a result of this. There is so here we're looking at, this is from Morgan Stanley. So Morgan's basically evaluating this company risk. And what they typically see is that there's a pretty strong correlation between unemployment rates and disability rates. So the likelihood is, and it's a lagging indicator, so it's not something that you see in the next quarter or two, but typically within the next year, you anticipate to see this risk kind of transfer back into the disability carrier market. So if you're on like a rate pass right now, or even if you're not, even if you don't renew until later this year, it might be in your interest to market this off cycle before the market hardens up a lot. We anticipate in 2021 that you're going to see this be a much tougher market and renewals will not look very favorable in the disability space. So it might be worth shopping it now off cycle. This is one of those benefits that we see employees typically they don't care about the brand name as much as they care about the coverage and that it's there. So whether it's MetLife or Guardian or some other provider that you like and that has good contractual language. So we don't just say you shop and move just to get a great guarantee, but if all things being equal, that you have a good solid contract and you can get a longer rate guarantee with comparable rates to what you have now, it would be in your interest to take a look at this off cycle. Another piece, transitioning away from kind of insured benefits just to a benefit that you can provide to your employees. So as a result of the, where's this here? So as a result of the president's declaration of a national emergency on March 13th, it triggered Section 137. I don't think I talked about this on the previous FFCRA websites. I think I talked, or webinars. I think I talked about this on one of the CARES ones. So basically, Section 139 enables employers to make non-taxable qualified disaster relief payments to employees for reasonable and necessary expenses resulting from the coronavirus pandemic. And it's a very, very general way of saying that, due to these extraordinary circumstances surrounding the qualified disaster, employees aren't required, and employees actually, for the sake of this benefit, aren't required to actually even substantiate the expenses in order to qualify for this benefit. So what we're seeing is employers, and I've seen this happen to a number of companies that we work with, is they're saying, look, you're at home, and as a result of you working from home, maybe you don't have a keyboard, or maybe you don't have a second monitor. We have a laptop, and you go into a docking station at the office, but when you come home, you don't have a monitor, so we need to get you a monitor. Maybe you don't have a mouse at home. Maybe you have a desk chair that is uncomfortable. Maybe you're sitting on a hard folding chair. So in order to make those ergonomics work for your employees, you can provide them a one-time payment that they can provide minimal substantiation for from what the IRS is saying. Now, I would offer that it's in your best interest to have them provide more substantial substantiation for that for your accounting purposes. But there isn't a limit that's set on this. I've seen companies be conservative and say, you have $200, submit your bills through whatever your system is, and just go out and buy what you need, whether it's, like I said, monitors, keyboards, mice, an ergonomic chair of some nature. But it's a benefit that you can provide to your employees. I think we're likely to see, even though we're talking about returning to the office today, you're likely to still see a lot of remote work. So I think it's in your best interest to take a look at this. I say this with, I have a bachelor's degree. I took 2 accounting classes, so I'm not a CPA and I'm not a tax professional. So definitely talk to your tax professional about how this will work. Much like all the stuff that happened with the PPP loan, there's the way that it's written, and then the way that it gets interpreted, and then the way that it actually falls out after things happen, right? So this is a pretty solid benefit that I've seen, and I haven't seen anything kind of shaky with this, but it's worth having a conversation with your CPA. With that, so prior webcasts on the FFCRA that Adam, Jeremy, and I can be found in kind of 2 places that I have. One, you can go to just my LinkedIn page and you can see them here. There's a number of them that we put together. Or you can go to my, although I'm a Gen Xer, my very millennial titled YouTube page, Insurancing, and you can see them here. So you can kind of run back through there. Happy viewing on that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adam. So the mic is yours, my friend. Let me stop sharing this and run away with it.
All right, well, you stop sharing and I will start sharing in a moment. It is great to be back. This is our 4th time together, the 3 Musketeers ride again, as it were. So we'll go ahead and pull up some slides. And let's see, are you guys seeing anything that says rethinking your reopening?
It is up.
Okay, and do you have the full slide or do you have the presenter version?
Full slide.
Okay, yay, I love it when things work the way they're supposed to. Okay, so what I'd like to give you to think about first is just rethinking the entire idea of reopening. We've heard some stuff from the White House. We've heard some stuff from the state of Virginia governor, as well as other governors. They're starting to move in that direction. You, as an individual corporation, organization, nonprofit, you need to now make your own decisions and think about your reopening. Let's give you some things to think about. The first one I want to give you is rather morbid. During the entire Vietnam conflict, there were 58,220 U.S. service members lost. During the COVID-19 conflict, if you will, we have lost over 80,000 Americans. There are no non-combatants. Everybody is on the front lines here. You've got to understand your people are understandably concerned. Perhaps you're concerned. I know I'm concerned. Regardless of what the White House, the governor, or anybody else might say, I'm making my decisions for myself, my health, and my family, as are your employees. So when you look at these numbers, they're pretty shocking. But I want to give you a recent quote from the New York Times. It says as follows: about 2/3 of Americans are worried states are lifting restrictions prematurely. They're saying it is too soon for businesses such as retail stores, movie theaters, gyms, and restaurants to reopen. That was the New York Times quoted a Washington Post and University of Maryland poll, which came out May 5th. They went on to say 68% of those people polled believe that the worst of the pandemic is either happening now or is yet to come. If you exclude New York City, cases in the rest of the United States are steadily rising. The CDC has done models which predict that new cases will rise by 20% in reopening states, with 100,000 more deaths expected from the coronavirus by early August. That means the number that's on this screen right now, we're not about halfway there. I'll let that sink in for you. As you're thinking about reopening, you should be thinking about if you should even be reopening, let alone how to reopen. The article went on to say that more than a month has passed since there was a day with fewer than 1,000 deaths from the virus. Almost every day, at least 25,000 new coronavirus cases are identified, meaning that the United States, which, yay, go America, we're leading the way with more cases than anybody, can expect a 2 to 4% increase every single day. It is your decision what to do with your business. If you feel that you need to open, we understand that. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But I give you pause. Should you even be reopening at all? If you are reopening, there's some things to think about. First, about the workforce. You know your workforce. What type of workforce do you have? Is it white collar? Is it blue collar? How big is it? What are the demographics, average age, gender, etc. of that workforce? These are things that you need to consider. Every organization is going to be a little different. As my friend Brian said, we're here giving general advice. So you need to look at the makeup of your workforce, because your neighbor in the building or your buddy down the street with a different workforce might feel more comfortable reopening. You need to make that decision for yourself. You also need to consider the culture of your organization. Some organizations are very democratic. They involve everybody, very transparent in their decision making. That's a beautiful thing. How is that going to manifest itself now as you decide whether or not to go back to work? Has your work style, maybe you have a very collaborative type of work style, has that been hindered by your geographic dispersion and you feel you need to get that back? I don't know. Zoom's great. Look at the great work Jeremy and Brian and I are doing together, right? But maybe you feel like you need to get back in the workplace. Understanding your culture is part of that decision. Of course, there's also almighty economics and the powerful dollar. How has teleworking and or being closed, whether in full or part, how has that impacted the finances of your business? Because you need to stay in business. Can you do that if you continue to be remote? If you're growing doubt every day, then maybe you need to take the reopening step because of economic motivations. And of course, I wouldn't be doing my pal Jeremy a good service if I didn't mention law and the risk. We've talked about some of this before. My buddy Brian just told you where you can find our old webinars. We talked about OSHA requirements. We talked about ADA accommodations, and we'll touch on that briefly again. The FFCRA has put a whole raft of new obligations onto employers out there. All of that is important, as is the risk that goes with what if somebody contracts the virus and tries to blame you. We'll talk about that more later. Are you prepared to be at the intersection of these major items as you are making the decision? It's like sitting here in the middle of a holiday weekend highway traffic jam. Not a pleasant place to be, but that's where we find ourselves now. And these are definitely the things you should be considering. Now, if you do decide to reopen your workplace, then there are some things that we think can help you think through your approach in phases. We've seen the White House talk about opening in phases. We've seen governors talk about opening in phases. So what the heck? Why don't you use that same approach? I've identified some potential phases for your thinking. Phase one is what I call the pre-return, which is analyzing your vendors, your space, and the supplies you need to reopen. Phase two is the pre-return part two. Let's do some surveys of your staff. Let's analyze them. Let's get some feedback from them, some guidance from them. And don't forget your managers. Your managers are key. The things they do, the things they say, it's always true, always. It's even more true now in the era of COVID-19. Phase three, come on in. We're open for business. We're going to break that down. Phase 3A, are you prepared to pivot? Are you doing things different than you have before out of necessity or out of desire? You need to make sure your staff is on board and ready for it. And last but not least, phase 3B, risk management, what I like to call the just-in-case phase. Let's break this down. Phase one, pre-return vendors, space, and supplies. Are you ready to open? Do you have an office cleaner? And if they do, are they ready to come in more frequently? Are they going to change their processes so they're cleaning door handles and things like that more often than they have been? Your office has been closed. They weren't cleaning it. You're coming back, they need to be ready to once again service your space, your account. Definitely get in touch with your building management. Are they prepared to handle more occupants in the building? And what guidance are they sharing? Next, what about physical changes in your workplace? in my vast network, one of the organizations that I have a relationship with is actually a handyman service. They're a company and they do all kinds of stuff. And in speaking with the gentleman from the organization I know, he was telling me, Adam, we are so busy right now because companies are calling us in to put up, plexiglass guards, temporary or permanent, whatever they may be. We're making changes. We're putting in shields. Wow. You got to figure, who would do that in your office? They're going to call HR and say, come hang some plexiglass over here? No. We need a handyman to do that. So if you're making physical changes to your workplace, allow the time to get that done. And then you'll be able to share that with your staff. Say, hey, these are the things we are doing or have done. Heck, take some pictures, put it on the Zoom. Let everybody see how you're making the changes because you're looking out for their health and safety. Of course, PPE and PPP, those are the three letters we've been throwing around so much in the last 2 months. Do you have it? Heck, can you even get it? Now, in a lot of things, it's not as difficult to get as it first was. Masks you can get, gloves, hand sanitizer, but you still may need to order it and wait a few weeks. By the time it finally arrives, okay, great, but don't say you're going to open on Monday. It's Wednesday afternoon. You're not going to have the stuff you need. You're trying to get your staff to come back and feel confident. You better make sure you order everything you need and have it in-house before opening day. I was talking to Brian in preparation for this. We were talking about what you see at the grocery store. Every aisle's got a great big arrow on it. Tells you what way to go. Are you going to do that in your workplace? Depending on the physical layout, that might make sense. And of course, what public areas do you have that you might close? Perhaps some kind of break rooms, things like that. Refrigerators are now off limits. Microwaves are now off limits because that does not strike me as a good way to keep everybody safe when we're all pushing the same buttons and storing our food in the same area. So these are decisions you need to make because then you can move on to phase 2. Still the pre-return, but this is where we're talking about surveying your team, talking to your team, training your team, and of course, your managers. What I like to say here is collaborate, yes, dictate, no. The more you can collaborate with your team, the better off you are. I said it in prior webinars. I've also had the good fortune of being on some radio interviews lately about this little thing called the coronavirus. And I've said repeatedly, this is a time for flexibility, adaptability, and creativity. And that means also collaborating with your staff. What can we do to make you feel safe? What can we change? It's not just about the leaders, the owners, and the managers figuring it out. We're all in this together. Get their feedback. I'm on some different HR listservs and some other groups. We were talking about how to survey our staff prior to the return, whether it's SurveyMonkey, whatever. One of the individuals in the group says she's going to put out two-question survey. One's going to be multiple choice. The other is going to be free response. The questions were, what are your return to work challenges and concerns? Is it childcare? Is it having to commute on the metro, right? These are all different concerns. How are you going to help your staff? How are you going to understand them and then help them? Check all that you apply. Give them 5 or 6 answers. See what's on their mind. And then the last question that she was going to ask was, how do we help you to feel confident and safe in returning to work? What can we do for you? As you're thinking about the survey results, discuss them with your leadership team and figure out this is part of our game plan going forward to respond to the concerns of our people. And not only are you responding to them, but just the fact that you asked shows that you care. But a little bit of advice, do not do a survey and ask questions unless you're prepared to respond. Moving on down the bullets here, written communications. We want to put some things out in writing. I know somebody who knows somebody that works at SAIC, big major government contractor. That person is actually on a contract with NASA supporting work for NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmosphere Association. They put out joint guidance. So the employer, SAIC, in collaboration with NASA and NOAA, put out joint written communication to the employees in preparation for them to return to the workplace. Perhaps that might work for you if you're a prime, you're working with your subs, you're working with your prime, you're working with your government customer. But even if you're not in the GovCon space, how about this? Maybe a joint communication that comes from you your building manager, and your office cleaning team. That might make sense for you. Of course, never hurts to talk about training. I want to talk about your managers for a moment. Employees look to their managers for guidance and often for comfort. This is a difficult time to be a manager trying to guide and comfort your employees. You, as the leaders, the HR team of the company, need to prepare your managers to be on the same page, singing from the same sheet of music, and giving the same message and guidance. Take the time, spend some quality time with your management team, one-on-one, whatever it needs, so that they say the right things and give the right direction. Of course, other training is going to be important. One of the things you may need to train people on is how we're cleaning this space and how you're going to help maintain it. How about this? We've heard a lot about employers mandating forehead temperature checks upon return to work. Who's doing that? Got to make sure you train them. They got to be willing to do it. Maybe they're going to ask some questionnaires, have you had symptom X, symptom Y, symptom Z as prescribed by the CDC that might be indicative of exposure. Policies. Well, this is HR, got to talk about policies. Are we doing staggered work days? Are we doing staggered work times? Perhaps we're talking about equipment. Our new policy is everybody's going to have a personally issued piece of equipment, no more sharing, so that we avoid potential transmission of the disease. Accommodation. Just on Monday, Jackson Lewis. Hey, Jeremy, aren't you with Jackson Lewis? What a coincidence, right? Jackson Lewis put out a great piece recapping EEOC guidance regarding the ADA. We definitely recommend you check that out because they talked through how the reasonable accommodation process is working today in light of the global pandemic. A lot of different things to think about. And what you may want to think about, last but not least, we often issue policies and handbooks, and we get written acknowledgments of those things so that we can prove in a court of law that our employees knew, right? They knew what was in the handbook because we have a written acknowledgement. Maybe you want to think about doing some sort of written acknowledgement that says, yes, I sat through 1 hour of return to work training with my head of HR, etc. One more way to protect yourself. I leave it to you to mull that over. Moving right along, come on in, we're open for business. That's awesome. What are you gonna do to maintain the continued safety of your team? We already talked about temperature taking and daily questionnaires, that's great. Remember, the FFCRA is still in effect through the end of this year. Though you may have returned to the workplace, who cares? They are still entitled to paid time off. They are paid sick leave. They're still entitled to expanded FMLA. We're not going into that. We've covered that on prior webinars. But those do not go away just because you're back in the workplace. Processes that are changing, procedures that are changing. What are you doing to limit visitors to the workplace? How about deliveries? How about vendors that traditionally come? What are you doing to deal with them? What's your normal stance on business travel? Just because you're back in the workplace, does that also mean you're back on an airplane? Think through all of this. And by the way, this is a segue to the next thing. While we're back in business, how are we preparing for the next wave? I mentioned in the quote from the New York Times earlier, there's a lot of people who believe this is not the end. We will see a resurgence in the fall. I'm not a doctor, I'm just an HR guy. But what I do know is if this happens again, you should be thinking now while you're back in business, how do we prepare? That could include, let's give some tech training, right? Who are those people who were at home and never could turn on their darn camera, right, to do the Zoom, right? Who was the guy who was always fumbling around to share his screen, right? That was me, just kidding, right? Time to do some tech training while we're back in the office together. What equipment do we need to get them? We know Brian just explained, we can spend some money, it's tax-free, let's do it, right? What kind of software upgrades? Maybe we need some accounts to different softwares, digital signing, for example. And think about regular policies. And an example I give you here is your PTO policy. You may have certain guidelines around carryover, payout. How is that going to evolve in light of Corona? All right, let's talk about being prepared to pivot and being able to prepare your people to pivot. This is a new world. Are you approaching marketing differently? Are you introducing new products, new services? Are you going to try to do business in new locations? What about new customers? What are the things you need to do to survive? Maybe you're changing your pricing model, right? I've even heard that Google lowered its pricing on online advertising, right? Even the big boys are affected by this. What new hours are you going to work? Maybe you're working those new hours in part for social distancing purposes, but because you want to be more flexible, more customer friendly. You know, I bank at TD Bank. They say we're America's most friendly bank, right? And you can go bank there on a Sunday. Yay. Do you need to do some of these things to help you survive? And how are you preparing your people? Now, when it comes to being prepared to pivot, I want to give you a very famous example. Maybe you've heard of a company called Walt Disney. I'm taking you back to the era of World War II, going back in history here. During World War II, Walt Disney Studios went from making animated classics like Snow White to producing propaganda, training, recruiting films for the US government and the military. I got to tell you, Donald Duck, you know, he's fired up. He's got a temper. Man, if he wanted to recruit me to go fight the Axis, I would have been on board, man. I want to be like Donald, right? Scrappy little rascal that he is. You take somebody who, you know, one day they're making, you know, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the next day they're making movies about how to throw a grenade and how to put up a tent and stuff. Are you prepared to pivot? Are your people prepared to pivot? Can you get them prepared? You may have done some layoffs. You may have done some furloughs. How are you dealing with that? Bring back the people that are going to help you pivot. And last but not least, in my phases part, risk management and just in case. What are you going to do if a staff member gets sick? Right now, if they get sick, you'll feel bad, but they're at home. You're not worried about exposure. They get sick, they come to the office, you've got a whole boatload of new worries. Are you going to be prepared for that? And of course, as I already said, what if there is that second wave? How are you going to respond better this time? Last time, this all just blew up, right? The middle of March, all of a sudden, poof, everything just happened. How are you going to be ready for it? How will you respond faster? How will you respond more efficiently? Are you going to give this new guidance that says, though we may be open every single day, I want every single person to take their laptop home? Because if something happens and we need to immediately go back to remote work, it's not a problem. I don't know. It's up to you to decide. All right, we're going to shift gears. I want to revisit a few old things from prior webinars because they are still valuable info. Back in the middle of March, March 20th, it was an announcement made regarding the good old I-9 form that said it's okay to do that remotely, right? We don't have to see their documentation in person, which has always been the rule. That guidance ends May 20th. That is next Wednesday, my friends. Also, if you have been doing this remotely, that was fine, but the rule says that once you come back into the workplace, and this just tells you that you must physically examine the document when you resume normal operations. So if you're back in the workplace, that's resuming normal operations. And within 3 days of everybody being back in the office, you need to physically see and inspect their allowed ID, just like in the old days, just like pre-corona. I don't know if you remember that. Feels like so long ago. Judging by the length of my hair, it must have been, right? So time to switch back to the old rules and the old responsibilities here. Important that you follow those rules because we want to keep you out of trouble. One other thing to mention, what if you get somebody who presents you with expired ID? Now we know, because we're all sharp folks here, that expired ID is a no-no. But on May 1st, we got some new guidance about how to handle expired ID, because how are you going to go get a new driver's license when the DMV is closed? They understand this. It's hindering the ability of people to do what they normally would and should. So check out the I-9 Central website on USCIS, and you'll learn more about that. Looking ahead, for those of you who have DC employees, I mentioned this in a prior webinar, but now it's the middle of May. It's important to mention it again because this new law takes effect July 1st, and the DC Paid Family Leave Law allows for people to take up to 2 paid weeks for their personal medical leave or 6 paid weeks for family leave for caring for a sick family member. Now, this is not meant to be a primer on the DC Paid Family Leave Act. It is meant to be a reminder. So I want you to know, if this keeps going, and there's no reason to believe it won't, you have DC employees who get sick, you're going to have to consider this after 1 July. Now, I want to assure you this is not the first time I have discussed this. I've been on the radio, satellite radio, on the web, on TV, and in print. And what I've given you here is links to many articles and radio recordings from Miami, Florida, to Columbus, Ohio, to nationwide on satellite radio. So I'm getting ready to wrap up here, but if you'd like to know more, feel free to give me a listen in some of these other places. So thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be back with the Three Musketeers and to now hand the ball off to my pal, Jeremy. Jeremy, I'm going to exit out the sharing here and take it away, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen as well. I've got a couple slides for everybody to look at. Let me just make sure everybody can see it. I think everybody can see the presenter tool. Hold on one second. Let me just switch that. Okay. So it's nice to see everybody bearded and everybody have longer hair than they had a couple months ago. Recently getting so desperate that I thought about I did ask my wife to cut my hair. I think Brian said the same thing earlier when we were talking, and my wife said, no way. So, you know, all these states are really thinking about, and I've already started going back. Adam's talked about that. He talked about the phased approach. I'm going to walk you through what most of the states have going on. And the takeaway here really is make sure you know what the executive orders say that apply to where you're operating. So, in one quirk of this that's coming out right now, and this is just this week, Virginia ordered that businesses could begin to reopen starting Friday. But a couple days ago, Governor Northam exempted from that order all the Northern Virginia counties and localities. So where you might be in Winchester and you're going to start opening up, you're not going to be opening up if you're in Loudoun, Fairfax, Arlington, Prince William, or any of the independent cities within some of those jurisdictions. So it's important to monitor those things. Keep an eye on what applies to you any given day. Most of the places are taking a phased approach. It's usually 3 phases or 4 phases in the case of a couple states like California. The typical phase 1 is a safer at home type strategy. It's obviously we're going to continue to encourage everyone to stay home. There's going to be a ban on social gatherings of more than 10 people typically. All the recommendations for social distancing, teleworking, and face coverings are all still in place. Businesses should make modifications, which Adam brought up earlier. Reduced occupancy for retail and food establishments. So usually it's like a 50% right now. The first phase is typically 50% occupancy. So in some places it's 25% occupancy. This phase usually lasts at least between 2 and 4 weeks. That's what a lot of the states are trending toward. Then your typical phase 2 relaxes some of those restrictions. You've got larger gatherings, and again, at least 2 to 4 weeks. And then your phase 3 is further relaxing, and then there's large gatherings. And then somewhere off way in the distance, when we get a vaccine, it looks like, there will be some semblance of normalcy. You don't know exactly when that's going to be, but that's what the experts are saying. And a lot of states and localities are kind of hunkering down, waiting for that. I read this morning that LA, Los Angeles, has decided to maintain its stay-at-home order through August. And so that's a rather extreme comparatively, but it is the reality. So Adam sort of mentioned the CDC guidance here and there, but the CDC in the last couple of weeks because the businesses are starting to reopen, the CDC has issued some new guidance about how you prepare to reopen. You know, a lot of it is the same stuff we saw in the weeks leading up to the shutdowns, right? So you want to recommend to your employees that they frequently wash their hands or they use hand sanitizer, that they avoid touching their face, use FDA-approved disinfectants, continuing social distancing, using face coverings. We all know about that. The guidance also advises engaging in a bunch of different strategies, and they give a lot of examples of how to minimize the number of people who come into contact with certain surfaces. And then what you do with those surfaces in order to get the number of contacts down or to protect the people who do contact them. Also, the CDC recommends developing a cleaning and disinfecting plan, so that some of the things that they suggest are similar to what Adam suggested: notifying your cleaning people, letting them know that they need to come more frequently, that they need to use specific types of disinfectants, that they need to look at surfaces where everybody touches with particular emphasis. But the CDC is strongly recommending a plan be in place. Now, what form does that take? I'm telling a lot of my clients that they should have a written plan for reopening and for making sure that the office is clean. And the CDC actually gives a handy cleaning and disinfecting flowchart on their website. So you're going to want to take a look at that guidance. If you have questions about it, you're going to want to reach out to somebody like Adam or I who can kind of help you go through what the CDC is looking at. The EEOC, Adam mentioned, also issued a lot of new guidance since the last time we talked, and with a particular emphasis on ADA accommodations. And I'm going to give you a couple examples here, and these are the most common ones that keep coming up for my clients. On teleworking, one of the FAQs asks whether the employer automatically needs to grant telework as a reasonable accommodation, and really the short answer to that is no. The normal, regardless of the coronavirus, the normal ADA interactive process, the normal communications that you would go through with any employee, any of the requests for medical information, all that is in place still. You still have to, and you should go through all of that process. So what about jobs that can't be performed remotely? And I'm thinking DC-centric here. We're thinking about cleared environments where contractors are working in SCIFs, or where you're working in a facility that's classified and your people can't work from home. So, what are you supposed to do when you have jobs that can't be performed remotely? And how do you give reasonable accommodations to those employees? So the answer that the EEOC gives is, if they're not already implemented, accommodations for those who request reduced contact can include things like changing the work environment, designing one-way aisles, using plexiglass, tables, or other barriers to ensure minimum distances. So we're talking about modifying your office. I think the analysis used to be an undue burden or hardship to employees or employers about whether or not they had to modify things. I think that burden has lowered now. I think you really don't have a lot of argument right now if you're saying, let's say you've got people who work in a cube farm, extending the plexiglass dividers between the cubes a foot or two normally might have been something that is rather expensive, and maybe the ADA wouldn't have said, you're required to do that. But now in this environment, I think it's much less clear. I think you probably do have to engage in some of these modifications. And of course, all of it has to be tailored to the individual employee that's requesting the accommodation. And then, of course, the EEOC also suggests other potential accommodations, and that includes restructuring your shifts, letting people temporarily transfer to different positions, modifying work schedules, all of these things sort of with the aim to help people with disabilities continue to perform the essential functions of their position. So here are some questions that my clients are asking. They're kind of the three most common ones I've gotten over the last month. I've had a lot of clients call and ask if they can have their employees sign a liability waiver for when they start to return to work. And the answer to that question is, well, you could have them sign a liability waiver, but that doesn't necessarily shield you from a whole lot. So we've talked in the previous webinars about the OSHA general duty. Every employer has a general duty to protect and provide a safe working environment for their employees. And what is it that you do to get there? You adhere to the CDC guidelines, you maintain social distancing, you encourage hand washing, you do the contact tracing when somebody gets sick, you bar people who have symptoms, all the things we talked about previously. Those are the things that you do in order to meet that general duty. And the flip of that is, it is very difficult, it will be very difficult for an employee to prove that they actually got sick in your workplace. You know, we go to the supermarket, we go to the gas station, we do some of these other things that we're currently allowed to do. It'll be very difficult for anyone to prove this is where I got it. Now, California, as screwy as it is, recently issued an executive order creating a rebuttable presumption that if an employee gets COVID-19, that they got it at work as opposed to anywhere else, which is really divergent from the rest of the country. Another thing to keep in mind about liability waivers is typically when an employee gets injured at work, they have one remedy, and that remedy is workers' comp. In most states, that's an exclusive remedy, which means that if somebody gets sick, they can't sue you for a whole bunch of other things. They have to go to workers' comp, and that's their remedy. And there's a public policy reason for why that's the exclusive remedy. Really, it is that employers get comfort over the fact that they know there's just this one remedy, and they're not worried about being sued, for other reasons. And employees get a very quick remedy. Typically, payments under workers' comp are made in relatively short order. They cover the things that an employee is typically out for having been injured at work, like medical expenses, like lost wages. And so the waiver isn't going to protect you any more than what in most states, and it can vary from state to state, but what in most states is an exclusive remedy for a workplace injury. Another thing I am getting a lot of questions about is what can we do with regard to continued screening of returning or already on-site employees. So again, a lot of this is coming back to what it was before the lockdowns. You want to make sure that you have very clear communications with your employees about whether or not they have any symptoms, whether or not they've been in contact with any other people who have had symptoms. You direct them to stay home if they have symptoms. You direct them to self-quarantine. You do the contact tracing if you have somebody who is sick. Those are the things that you're going to want to do. Another option, and Adam mentioned it, is taking temperatures. You want to make sure that, look, that's not the be-all, end-all. There are a lot of people out there who have COVID that don't have a fever, and vice versa, right? The inverse of that is also true. But that's one way to do it. Another thing that some of my clients are doing, there are companies out there developing apps where an employee answers a series of questions before returning to work. And that app will tell them whether or not they're authorized to return to work. And it's the same stuff that you would normally ask your employees. Have you been exposed in the last 14 days to somebody with COVID-19? Or have you traveled to an area that's considered a hotspot? Have you had a fever? Have you had a sore throat? All these things. And then there's a determination there at the end that says whether or not the person can return. That's an option. It's expensive. As far as I know, there's also some privacy concerns, but there are people who are privacy and ADA and HIPAA concerns about some of those things, but it is an option that's out there. I would encourage anyone who thought that they might consider something like that to talk to a lawyer who knows about HIPAA, privacy, and the ADA. Another thing that happens a lot and is continuing to happening right now for a lot of my clients is, what if you have somebody who just says, I don't feel comfortable coming to work, and they're not going to come to work? It's a tough situation. I would encourage you all to engage with that employee like you would as if they had a disability. Ask them questions to get at the reasons why they don't feel comfortable coming to work. And then when it's clear that they don't have a disability or they don't have an underlying condition that would make it difficult for them to come to work, I then encourage my clients to provide the employee with a list or a narrative of all of the things that they're doing to protect employees in the workplace. So providing PPE, putting hand sanitizer at stations, increased cleanings, all the things that we're talking about. You tell that employee, look, these are the things that we're doing. You should feel safe. And we're going to maintain social distancing. We're going to do all those things in the office. You should feel safe coming to the office. And then at some point, continued refusal means you have to make an employment decision. What that is, I don't know. It's specific to every employee, but at some point, you'll have to make a decision about what to do with that person. So a lot of my clients are aware that I've only had one client actually get sued so far under COVID-related reasons, but I am aware of a lot of firm clients that have been, and I'm also aware of other cases that are out there. And here's just a list, a sampling of some of the things that are out there. So you've got failure to accommodate claims, we've talked about that at length. Warn violations, that's if you've done a mass layoff, whether or not you met the technical requirements of warn. COBRA violations, so if you terminate someone, there are cases out there where technical non-compliance with the COBRA regulations, for example, of all the information that has to go into a COBRA notice. If there's a technical violation of even one of those things that has to go in a notice, you can be sued for that. And the remedies are quite lengthy. I mean, they're quite terrible for employees. Our employers. It's $110 a day per employee for every day that person doesn't have the right notice in hand. Other ERISA claims, so a lot of companies are getting sued right now for not making contractually obligated contributions to 401k plans. That's something you have to keep in mind. Wrongful termination claims, so if you have somebody who refuses to come to work and you let them go for that, they're likely that they will sue you given the current environment. Whether there's an actual claim there or not depends. Other kind of general claims are negligence. We've talked about OSHA. Wage and hour is a big issue when you have people telecommuting. If you have non-exempt employees who are not working, or not keeping track of their time while they're telecommuting, and they're answering emails at off hours, and they're doing all kinds of work, which quite frankly everyone is doing. It's odd for me to not be working at 8:30, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night now. I take breaks during the day, and my workday just continues to extend. And that's common for everyone. But when you have an hourly employee and they're doing that and they're not getting paid for all of that time, you have potential wage and hour exposure. So those are the things that I wanted to chat about. Happy to turn it over to questions. Let me just make sure I unshare. I think my screen went away. Brian, could you kick me into unsharing?
Yep.
Great.
All right, so I've had a few questions that have come in, and we've been able to answer them just mostly with links. As far as all of the links are concerned that you've seen, whether they're to YouTube or things that maybe we've spoken about, I know I can speak from my perspective. All the links that I have talked through will be in a post event email. There was a question that came to me about your presentation, Jeremy, and yours, Adam. The way we've handled this in the past, and I'll just throw it over to you guys to comment, is that they'll have the same contact information that I have, and they typically do their own individual follow-ups. And I believe that you can provide those decks out to them individually or as a mass email. Is that correct? Yeah.
Happy to send it to anybody who wants.
Gotcha. So, and their contact information will be in the post-webinar follow-up email. Typically, that goes out about 24 hours after this. So, yeah, you can certainly get it from there. And then let's see. I did get notice from Trisha. Thank you, by the way. She sent a note right as I was talking. I didn't see it until later. That sure, she does have and we do have the SHRM approval. So I'll actually have the form either later today or tomorrow. HRCI is always they just scrutinize a little bit longer. Typically, it takes about a week or so for them to get through their process. So I would imagine if it's not late this week, it'll be early next week. Now, as far as questions, so Jeremy, the first question that I have was, what happens if you live in Virginia but you work in DC? Whose executive order should you abide? And I guess this could work for Virginia to Maryland. This could work for somebody that's, not in the Northern Virginia area, but in the greater open Virginia area. Any kind of cross-jurisdictional kind of question.
So, couple wrinkles here. So let's just assume right now that the only businesses that are open are essential businesses. Okay, so that up over the last 2 months, really, that's the only businesses that have been open. Most of the executive orders have exceptions for travel having to do with commuting to and from work if you work at an essential business. So, and that's particularly relevant around this area, right, where you're always crossing into Maryland or DC or Virginia. So I know for sure off the top of my head that Maryland's has that qualification in it, because I have a client who has people commute from Delaware, DC, Pennsylvania, Virginia, all over the place. And they were concerned about whether or not Maryland's executive order required that people who travel in, because Maryland's executive order does say people who travel into the state from out of the state have to self-quarantine. And so, but there's an exception in there for travel incidental to commuting. There's also just pass-through travel. So like if you're just passing through the state on your way somewhere else, you don't have to self-quarantine. But most of the executive orders around the country, and including these three, have that type of exception in it. I would generally follow, so if you have a question about whether or not your business should be open, you're going to want to follow the executive order in the place where your business operates. And then if you're an individual employee, you're going to want to look at both. So you're going to want to say, all right, does me being in Virginia have some restriction on my travel? Which quite frankly, it doesn't. Virginia's is very permissive. If you actually read it, the executive order is quite permissive. Although it's not being enforced that way, it's pretty permissive. Then I would look at where you're going to make sure that your business is still open or should be open under the auspices of the executive order where your business is located.
Good, thank you. And I see we're 2 minutes past. There was another question, so we'll address that. But for those of you that have kind of chunked out your time for an hour, I appreciate your attendance today. I know that with no more travel anymore, it's like everyone backs themselves up. Like it's like a meeting at 1, a meeting at 2, a meeting at 3, a meeting at 4, or every on the half hour. It's all of a sudden you get done with the day and you're just so tired of talking. It's unbelievable because you never had a chance to drive from one office to another office and regain your composure. So for those of you that can't stick with us, again, this is being recorded. Once I get it down onto my laptop, I'll get it back up into YouTube. I imagine that's probably 24 hours. So if you have to drop off now, that's great. Otherwise, I do have another question here. Jeremy, I'm sure you can read it, but I'll read it for the audience and you as well. Adam, I think this would be pertinent for your input. So any advice for companies who have a mixed workforce of essential on-site employees who have been working through the pandemic and corporate employees who can work remotely or work effectively remotely? How to navigate the return to work for corporate folks who can work from home and being fair to those essential and on-site?
You want to go, Adam?
All right. Well, the first question is, though you can return to work, do you need those corporate folks back there, right? A lot of companies are looking at cost savings from a smaller footprint of office space, office supplies, utilities, blah, 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 right? All these potential advantages. So, I've known some companies that have no corporate office. Everybody works remotely. And I'm getting a vibe, I could be wrong, but I'm getting a vibe that this might be for a government contractor where people are working at the government site, continuing to perform their duties, while back at corporate, who's running the company end of things, they were dispersed during this, right? Well, again, I know companies, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger, where there is no corporate office, and those people have never had to go to work. So while I appreciate this idea of fairness, I would still question the fact that everybody is in their place doing their job the way that it is appropriate to be done and effective for the company. So there you go. If you're bringing them back for business reasons, then you're bringing them back for business reasons. And Jeremy and I already outlined a whole boatload of things for you to think about. But just staying focused on the question at hand, am I bringing them back because I need them? In which case, I need them back. If I don't really need them and I'm letting them work from home, then they just get to work from home. Some jobs allow people to telework and some don't. That has been a huge issue since March. We've seen that across the country, across the American workforce, and now you're going to see it in a small scale in your own individual corporation. I'm not trying to not be fair. I'm not trying to not be considerate of people, but I'm trying to take into account all things. And you know what? Maybe they're able to telework in their job and you're not.
I would just add that most of the executive orders and the guidance from the White House indicate that employers should continue to permit telework whenever possible. So if you have a segment of your workforce that can telework, generally speaking, the advice is to continue to let them telework. Now there's wrinkles for that, but in general.
Good, thank you. So next is, if our business is in Virginia, and we've never had employees teleworking full-time in DC, but we may need to extend 100% telework for a while to accommodate, at what point do we need to worry about DC employment laws being followed? For instance, do we need to start tracking and adhering to DC sick leave effective 7/1? To clarify, I'm speaking about employees who currently live in DC or Maryland but work in Virginia. So basically their site is now, their work location, I think we talked about this a little bit in previous sessions, their work location is their home and they live in DC. And so that's their work location. So with that.
So you probably, right. There would be like what I think will happen answer, and then what I think is actually the rule. So DC is extremely employee protection friendly. You have to assume that at some point, and it might not be explicit right now, but at some point, DC will attempt to reach into your business and declare that the people who telecommute in DC are DC workers. That likely will happen at some point. It hasn't, as far as I know, isn't anything formalized. I will tell you that as far as the anti-discrimination laws in the district are concerned, it is very, very clear. In fact, it's explicit in the statutes that wherever somebody works, the DC law if somebody works in the district, the DC law applies to them. Now, are they going to extend that works to temporarily working as a result of the pandemic? I haven't seen a case where they've done it yet, but I have to say, I would imagine that they would try. Now, I don't know whether the parts of your question, the other ancillary parts of your question are very difficult to answer in a general way. Like the question about whether or not you need to be ready for DC paid sick leave or paid family leave for those folks, I would have to look at that. I don't know. I mean, my assumption would be at some point DC might try to say you owe those people paid family leave, but I don't know whether they've done it, and I don't know whether or not the regulations would permit it. I just off the top of my head, I don't know.
I'll throw something extra in there, and obviously there's only one guy who's a lawyer, and it's not me, it's the other guy, But the fact is, I have a client who has some people who reside in DC, and they telework. This is pre-COVID. They telework 1, maybe 2 days a week. And so the question was, does that employer have to pay the tax for that person to support the paid family leave benefit? And we looked at it and we said, well, no, because the majority of their work is not performed in DC. They're only teleworking 1 day a week, maybe 2. That's 20 or 40% of the time. And the law said it's for people who work the majority of the time. So that was fine. Then along comes the coronavirus. We're all teleworking from wherever we may be. What's the tipping point, right? At what point is the majority of your work, right? So like the last 2 months, if I've been in DC teleworking, well, clearly I've been teleworking for 2 months from DC, but that's only 2 months out of a year. What's the measurement period? That I'm not sure about, and you'd have to do some more specific digging, but I just wanted to throw that out in support of Jeremy's point that you may be okay today, but the longer this goes on and the more that individual teleworks, the greater the likelihood that you will need to pay the tax for them and that they will be eligible for that benefit, and others as well. But I'm just talking about that one because that was in my presentation and in your question.
These states also want the money. I mean, they want the tax money. They want to have a pocket of cash sitting there for paid family leave that they're earning interest on, right? So they're incentivized to try to grab your cash. I mean, it's like anyone following the news lately would have seen that New York is not going to give a waiver to organizations that sent people to work in New York to treat people who were victims of the coronavirus, right? So New York has this law that if you work physically within New York for more than 15 days, you have to pay, the employers has to pay the payroll taxes in New York. And so there are all these nonprofit organizations that send people up there to do things, and now they're going to have to pay the payroll taxes for New York. So can I imagine that happening in DC? Absolutely, I can. Right.
Money. Guys, I don't see any more questions. I think if there's nothing else that's popped in, I want to thank you, everyone that's on this. Thank you for your attendance and your time and your engagement today. Adam and Jeremy, thanks for your energy, enthusiasm, and expertise. Most importantly, for this audience, I think again it's been a good one. So appreciate your time, and for everyone else, have a great close to your day and a great close to your week. I guess Memorial Day is around the corner, maybe a week or so, a week and a half away now, right? So happy barbecuing.
Balloon.
Take care, everybody. Good luck to you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks so much.